Welcome to the Kidlit Distancing Social. I'm Laura Backus, publisher of the Children's Book Insider newsletter, and we are happy you're here with us tonight. We have a really awesome guest. It's going to be a fun conversation. If you are new to us watching for the first time and you want to get on our list to know about all of our upcoming guests and other fun stuff we're doing, you can go to writeforkids.org/ultimate-cheat sheet and get on our list, and you will get a free ebook, The Ultimate Children's Writing Cheat Sheet. This is our 30th year in business, and we've compiled our best beginner tips from 30 years into this ebook, and it's yours for free, just for getting on our list. So hope you do that. And if you are interested in subscribing to our newsletter, Children's Book Insider, we have a special deal for our socialites. It's $5 a month. And you get the newsletter delivered to your inbox every month. It's about 20 pages a month. We have market information, interviews with authors, editors, agents, lots of how-to articles. We have a special interview every month with either an agent or editor who gives us a special above the slush pile code that our subscribers can use to submit to them and jump over the slush pile. And then you also have access to our children's writing knowledge base. It's called the CBI Clubhouse, which is our membership site that goes with your newsletter. 30 years of info at your fingertips for $5 a month. Can't beat that. writeforkids.org/CBI. So normally at this particular moment, we have a section called Celebrate, where I celebrate your successes that you have sent me over the last week, but I didn't get any this week. So you all need to start sending me stuff that we can celebrate. And it doesn't have to be a publication. It can be you finished your manuscript, you came up with a great idea, you found a critique partner, you wrote for 15 minutes a day, every day this week, whatever it is you want to celebrate, let me know. Mail at writeforkids.org and put celebrate in the subject line, and we will help you celebrate on the next distancing social. All those milestones are important, and we are here for you. Writing can be a lonely occupation, so we've all got your back. Send me your good news. So I'm going to tell you what we're celebrating. Last week, I mentioned that we were having this webinar coming up. It's this Thursday, The Non-Marketer's Guide to Author Marketing. Now, if you're on our list, if you went and filled out a form I told you about a couple slides ago, you would have gotten an email about this. But if you're not on our list, but you want to check it out, it's going to be this Thursday, same time as we usually do the social, starting at 8 p.m. Eastern. And it is going to be awesome. It's for everybody who hates marketing. And Jennifer Vessel is a really incredibly talented marketer. And it's going to be about 90 minutes. There's a 10-page PDF workbook that goes with it, which is great. Helps you figure out your marketing plan. And it's $47 if you register before the live event. After the live event, the recording will be for sale, but it will be $67. So you want to register for the live event. And if you can't attend live, you will have access to the replay, lifetime access. So anyway, there's the link. It's bit.ly/want2market. The 2 is the number 2. bit.ly/want2market. And you could go there and you'll see a lot more information about what she's going to talk about. And you can also register there if you want. It's going to be great. Okay, here's a few links of interest. So every once in a while, it's nice for us to get some good news about publishing. So I wanted to just share this with you. That U.S. print book sales increased 8.2% in 2020. So this was a year when a lot of publishers were worried, bookstores were worried, everybody was worried that the whole industry was going to go out of business. And actually, sales increased. And children's books really knocked it out of the park. So juvenile fiction was responsible for a third of all the market growth, as you can see here. Over 2019 numbers. And the strongest subcategories, aside from general fiction, was animals, which I thought was very interesting in the fiction section. I'm guessing that's mostly picture books. Juvenile nonfiction grew by 23%. Now that makes sense. A lot of people are homeschooling. So you can see that some of these topics make sense. And then YA fiction grew by 21.4% and nonfiction by 38.3%. Oh my gosh, those are huge numbers. So this is all really good news for you. First of all, a lot of this is like, well, education reference language game books went up, by 23%. Should I write a book in that category? Not necessarily. It means that publishers are already publishing that stuff. But what this does mean is that the nonfiction market has been expanded. Back when I started in working in publishing in the mid 80s, you'd go into a bookstore and the children's book section of like Barnes and Noble was, or any big book chain really, was lots and lots and lots of fiction, and then there'd be one little shelf of nonfiction. Hardly anything. And even in libraries, there was a lot more nonfiction, but a lot of that was published direct to schools and libraries. You didn't see it in the bookstores. Now nonfiction is coming to its own. It's getting as much shelf space. And because of the pandemic and a lot of kids homeschooling, it's created more nonfiction readers for juvenile nonfiction. So these kids are going to keep reading nonfiction even after they go back to school. And that's really cool. And it can get very creative. So if you're interested in writing nonfiction, keep that in mind. But also the fiction category has grown. A lot of people say, do kids still read? Absolutely they do. And so I find this really, really encouraging information for all of you. So I just thought I would share that with you. Okay, and here's another great link of interest. If you're interested in self-publishing, this great blog post called Self-Published Authors, Amazon Exclusive or Go Wide by C.S. Latkin on her blog Live, Write, Thrive, is a really good overview of the pros and cons of giving Amazon an exclusive on your self-published books, especially if you use KDP Publishing, which is Amazon's self-publishing vehicle for both print and ebooks. So I know a lot of you here are self-publishing or thinking about it, and you're wrestling with this question. This is a very interesting blog post. I created a direct link here, bit.ly/Amazon exclusive. Amazon has to have the capital A to work. Or you could just go to her blog, livewritethrive.com, and you'll find it. Also, I got an interesting question today from one of our customers saying, is there a list of publishers or agents who take submissions of self-published books? No. I just want to put that out there right now. If you self-publish a book, you should self-publish your book because that's the way you want the book to go to market, not as a way to someday get the interest of a publisher or an agent. It almost never happens that they will pick up a self-published book. And if they do, it's because that book has made such a huge splash in the market and is such a huge commercial success and everybody's talking about it, that then the publisher will jump in and go, oh yeah, we'll publish that. And in fact, that happens a couple times when someone submits the book to publishers, they get rejections, so they self-publish it. It's like, woo, everybody loves it. And then the publishers come back and go, oh yeah, we're interested. But that's very rare. So consider it like a new car. Once you drive it off the lot, it's no longer new. That's kind of the way publishers look at self-published books. The book has been published. It's out there in the world. It's no longer a new property for them to acquire. It's already been published. They would rather put their money and time into something that is new. So just keep that in mind if you're self-publishing. It's still a great option for you, though. You can do well, really well with certain kinds of books when you self-publish. Okay, now my guest. So Carmella van Vleet has published 21 books. including nonfiction for all ages, and 2 middle grade novels. Eliza Bing is not a big fat loser, and Eliza Bing is not a star. She has, and Eliza Bing, the first one, won a Christopher Award, among other awards, lots of awards. But that's a big deal, a Christopher Award, so we'll talk about that. She has 2 forthcoming books, another middle grade from Holiday House called Nothing is Little, which is coming out in the summer of 2022. And a recently sold picture book that she can't give too many details about. It's still top secret, except that it's a co-authored biography of someone important but not well known, which is very cool because that's actually the kind of biographies that publishers are really looking for. You know, we've got Abraham Lincoln. We've got plenty on the presidents, plenty, you know, but these people who have done really interesting or great things, but we don't really know who they are, that's what they want. So that's awesome. Carmella has admitted to having a special place in her heart for character-driven middle grade fiction. And so I am really excited to be talking to her tonight about that. So welcome, Carmella. Come along, come on with me.
All right. Am I there?
You're here.
All right.
Yay!
I did it.
You did it. I know. It's always a moment of like, oh my God, I hope my camera turns on, but
right.
That's fine. Trust me, we've had worse things happen here on the social. We've been doing this for a long time now. So in fact, in like a couple of weeks, it'll be our 1-year anniversary of doing the Kidlit distancing social. So that went fast.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, welcome. So you did an interview with my newsletter, Children's Book Insider, in January of 2020. And I was looking at that and I was like, oh my gosh, that was over a year ago. That doesn't even seem possible. But you mentioned that while you enjoy writing nonfiction, and you've certainly done a lot of that nonfiction, your natural voice is middle grade fiction. So how do you know what your natural voice is? How did you discover that?
That's a really good question. The quick answer is everybody kept telling me that I had a middle grade voice. I actually, that's not how I started out. I really was interested in doing YA and picture books. And then I wrote a couple of YA, and the feedback that I kept getting back from critique partners and from agents and editors was all, you really have a middle grade voice. And I kind of, sit back and learn to embrace that. And I think it's really my sweet spot now, because I'm really in tune to that, my inner 12-year-old, I think that's what works for me. It's what I like to read. So that makes a big difference too. So if you're reading a lot of middle grade, you're hearing that kind of voice, you're hearing the kind of language that's being used.
Right.
And so it kind of just evolved that way. And I think a lot of it has to do too, that I was a teacher before I was a writer. I work with kindergartners, and I work with 4th graders, and just again, sort of being in tune to that age group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's
it started out that way.
Yeah, but that's a good point. Pay attention to what you like to read, what you're drawn to when you're just reading children's books yourself, just for your own, education, and that's going to often point you to what you might want to be writing or best be writing. There is a difference between that middle grade and that young adult sort of sensibility, and a lot of times it's hard for some writers to understand what that difference is. Back when I was editing manuscripts, which I don't do anymore, but I did it for many years, I would get manuscripts and they would say, this is a young adult manuscript. And I would say, no, it's a middle grade manuscript. Your character just happens to be 16, but it's not a YA story. So do you have any tips for kind of knowing sort of the mindset of your characters, so sort of tuning into that, or how they approach problems, how they approach the world, or do you go just sort of by gut at this point?
I kind of going by gut. I wish
Yeah.
that I had some great insight like the book would sell to people. You know, for me, you know, like when I talked about like learning to embrace it, and when I, you know, because I had sort of in my mind, I wanted to be a YA writer, and and when that wasn't really happening, you know, I've stepped back and I realized that once I sort of embraced it and realized that I really am connected to that 12-year-old self. I found that I was having a lot of fun, and you know, so I feel like if you are having trouble in a particular, you know, whether it's picture book or YA or middle grade, whatever it is, if you're having trouble with it, I mean, a lot of trouble, because writing is it's hard.
Right.
But you know, that's probably what your natural voice is going to be. And I found that when I was doing YA, it felt forced. And when I started writing middle grade, it just came more natural. You know, I could hear the language, and I was around middle grade kids more than teenagers.
Sure.
You know, doing Taekwondo, I do Taekwondo, so the kids were around, or the kids I would work with, you know, in writing camps and things like that. So it just picked up listening to them and realized that it was flowing better. And so, you know, that's sort of my advice is like, learn to surprise yourself. You know, you may think that you're one area, or, you know, one genre or one market, and then you discover, no, that's not it at all.
Sure.
You know, and like I said, I love that age.
Yeah, that's true. Your camera's freezing a little bit off and on. So if we happen to lose you, just log back in,
Okay.
and I might have you turn off your video at that point. But so far you're okay. You just kind of cut out a little bit. But you're absolutely right. And you know, I told this story 2 weeks ago on the social here, when I was way back in one of the first year or two of my newsletter. I interviewed Judy Blume. And one of the things she told me was when she just started out, she took a writing class and she thought she was a picture book writer and she wanted to write picture books. And she had all these manuscripts and she took it to the class, and the instructor very kindly said to her, "You are not a picture book writer. You're a middle grade author." And she listened. And, you know, the instructor said the same thing. Your voice is middle grade. And so Judy Blume listened and, you know, became Judy Blume. And then, of course, once she kind of established her voice, she was able to go a little bit older, a little bit younger. But her first books were that middle grade, you know, really getting her voice down. And I think that was so important to just know where your voice belongs. And sometimes it does take someone else to see it. Yes. So if someone tells that to you, someone who knows what they're talking about, consider the possibility that they might be right.
Be open to it.
Yes. Yes. So you also said in the interview with Children's Book Insider that you tend to write character-driven fiction. So this is a term that gets thrown around. And for those people listening who are brand new to writing, what does that mean, character-driven fiction?
Character-driven fiction are stories that are kind of focused on the characters and sort of that inner journey and their relationships with the other characters, as opposed to the choices that they're having to make. So like a plot-driven story is going to have a lot of action, or the character is going to be making those choices, and it's about the choices that they're making. And character-driven is more about how did that character get to that choice, and how, you know, right. how did they get there from where they started, kind of thing.
Yeah. So the events in the book really come out of who your character is and some internal journey they're making, like you said, whereas a plot-driven book is more things are happening on the outside, more to the characters, like an adventure story, a suspense, right. And they're having to navigate these external events in some way. So how did you go about developing your character, Eliza Bing, for your books?
Eliza, I think she just was inside me all the time, which is kind of interesting. And because so much of this story itself is kind of based on things that happened to my own daughter, she likes to joke that she's the real life Eliza. So sometimes I joke I actually lived with my character, which was helpful
You're
when I
kind
was
of
writing
cutting up
it.
on us there, unfortunately. Now
I'm
you're
sorry.
frozen. Carmella, if you can
Yes.
hear me,
Mm-hmm.
why don't we have you just turn off your video for a few minutes? That sometimes fixes it. You can keep talking, but
Okay.
then sometimes if it's a temporary connection that's a little,
Right.
she didn't freeze on your screen. Good, Natasha. Maybe it's me. But I'm glad she didn't freeze. Okay, well, why don't you come back on then? Come on the
Right.
video, and people, you can tell me in the chat box if she freezes on your end. Might just be me. Anyway, you were saying she's based on your daughter, right,
Yeah.
Eliza?
The idea was inspired by her. She had come home one day. She has, like my Liza Bing character, has ADHD. Actually, I have two kids with ADHD. But Abby, my daughter, really struggled as um, as an elementary school, definitely middle school. And she'd come home one day, and we were talking about, how was your day? What'd you learn, or whatever, in the car. And she said, I had a bad day. And I said, well, what happened? And so we started talking about it. And she said, I realized that I'm like the letter Y. She said, I'm not really a vowel and I'm not really a consonant. I don't really fit in. And I just was really struck by that. First of all, it's a really kind of profound thing for a middle schooler to say.
Sure.
But I started thinking about, okay, what is it like to be a kid who doesn't quite fit in? And I knew that I wanted to write about ADHD. In fact, the story sort of started that way, very much ADHD focused, talking about character driven. That story completely changed over the course of it, because Eliza started talking to me and telling me, things that were happening to her. And it was a really interesting experience, because a lot of it was, things that had happened to my daughter. So a lot of that, plot driven stuff we were talking about.
Right.
But she was in my head too, because a lot of the things that she was experiencing in Taekwondo, I also related to, because I do Taekwondo, and I remembered what it was like to be a white belt and walk into this class where, everybody else knew what was going on and I didn't. So I knew I wanted to write a character that, like I said, who had ADHD, and it just was a matter of sort of listening. And it's kind of hard to explain, to non-writers. But there's just, she would talk to me and she would tell me, this is what happened, or this is, I wouldn't say that, that kind of thing. And when I needed help, I'd yell at my daughter, hey, what would Eliza say in this situation? And she would very, very often no. Because I think she was very much a combination of, my daughter and myself and my own experience of just sort of figuring it out, what I wanted to do, and surprising myself, because that is very much what she does in the book. She doesn't really, she kind of limits herself, and she discovers that she's really good at something. And I've kind of discovered that as the books have gone on, that tends to be a theme, or it seems to be a running theme, sort of this idea of surprising yourself and being open to discovering something new. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Was there any desire to create a character with ADHD, so that did your daughter ever wish that there were more characters in her books with ADHD when she was reading middle grade?
Well, she's yes and no. I mean, there are books out there, of course, with ADHD, but they were kind of hard to find books about ADHD where it was a negative. And I very much wanted to write a story that talked about all the really great things that come along with ADHD. And I wanted that character very specifically, to succeed because of it, not despite of it. Because for us, when we got that diagnosis for my daughter, and for my son for that matter, it wasn't a depressing thing at all. It was like, yeah, okay, great. We know what's going on.
Now we know. Yeah.
we can address this. And
Yeah.
it was very much a key to like getting out of the jail instead of like being put into a jail or a label. And that was great. And so I was, really wanted to, like I said, focus on a character that it was just part of who she was. And, was a challenge, of course, but also helped her out. And what was kind of interesting about it is that when I was writing it and right before my agent started submitting it, because the first draft had no mention of ADHD. She talked about taking medication, but the character never once used ADHD or said specifically. She never labeled. We knew that something was going on, but she never labeled it. And my agent was like, no, you really have to label it at least once. And I really fought her for a long time. And then I just, and then when I stepped back, I realized, no, she's right. The kids are going to know that there's something going on because I wrote it that way. I wanted them to know, and I wanted them to, to have a, yes, you were right. This is what it is kind of moment. So, but it's like 30 or 40 pages into the book and it's only mentioned once in the first book. Yeah. In the second book, I think she mentions it once or twice too, for the same reason. I didn't want it to be the focus. I just wanted it to be something that.
No, I really like how, I really like how you did that. I noticed she didn't even comment on her own, needing to take medication or I was diagnosed.
Yeah, that was the way it was.
Until we got to know her, and then we're like, oh, okay, it's just part of who she is. It was not the thing. When you wrote the book, I've seen some discussion recently on some writing threads about writing for kids with ADHD, in that there is a certain writing style that they find easier to keep the focus. And I don't know much about that. But I didn't know if you had any of that in mind when you were writing. I noticed you have very short sort of chapters in the book, like really short. And each one has a really specific plot point, and then we move on.
Yeah. And I like to say there's actually a chapter that has no words. It's just the chapter title. And the shortest actually chapter with a word is one, which kids think is great fun. And that kind of came out naturally again when Eliza was talking to me. Her attention span was very short, and so that's the way I started writing it. And I discovered, if I was open to that, that really worked. And I liked that. I liked that writing in that short bit. That worked for me as a writer personally, and it worked great for the character as well. And I've discovered too, like with the new book, none of my chapters are, they're about 4 or 5 pages long. They're pretty short too. So apparently I write short chapters, and I'm okay with that. But like I said, it worked really well. The device worked really well with that particular character because it's short and it's digestible, and kids who are overwhelmed with reading, like a lot of kids with ADHD are, it's hard for them to focus. It gives them an opportunity to feel successful because, hey, I can read a chapter and it may just be 2 paragraphs, and that's okay.
I love it. My son had ADHD, and he's 25 now, but he had trouble reading. Nonfiction was fine. He could read nonfiction like crazy. And I think it's because often the nonfiction was broken up into shorter pieces, but a novel was tough for him. And I think if it had been just constructed the way you write your books, with those short breaks, so that you can have those easily digestible pieces, and you don't lose the thread of the story, it would have been much easier. So I'm glad you're doing that. And by the way, now he can read novels. He's fine. So they tend, as they get older, a lot of that stuff, they kind of grow out of it or learn how to cope with it. I'm glad you're doing that, and I think it makes the story feel like it's moving along much faster as well. Just because you feel like, oh my God, I've already gone through 5 chapters, and there's this sense of accomplishment, like, wow, I really read a lot, which is great. So, Eliza is an unreliable narrator. So, can you tell us a little bit about what that means? And is that a special challenge as a writer to have an unreliable narrator?
When I thought about this question, um, because I didn't necessarily set out to make her that way. And I think what, when I stepped back and thought about it, it was, that's the challenge when you tell a story in first person. Because to a certain extent, I think we're all an unreliable narrator. We're seeing, those characters are seeing that story or what's happening through their own lens. So to a certain extent, any story that's told in first person is probably going to have a little bit of, is going to be unreliable. There's going to be some things that are missing. But when I kind of realized that the relationship between Madison and Eliza, that Eliza was wrong about Madison, I started putting in little hints that I hoped that the reader would get, or that the reader would at least say, hey, there's some missing information here that Eliza didn't realize. So that was a challenge to kind of figure out, how do I present that? Because it's told in first person, how does Eliza share that in a way that, she's not getting it, but maybe the reader's getting a little bit a hint of it. So that was a little tricky.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, I think that in general, when you're just writing first person, I think it's their lens. So
that's true.
They're not going to always going to get all the things that we need them to get.
Sure. And I think middle grade is an especially unreliable age for narrators because of the way they're processing the world, and they're so self-conscious, and they think everyone's judging them, and they don't know how to fit in. And then I had an editor tell me once, and I always thought this made sense, the difference between middle grade and YA characters, a really key difference. YA think and then react, middle grade react and then think. So they react very emotionally to a situation, and then they might step back and go, oh, I should have done something different there.
That's a great explanation.
Yeah. And so because they react and then think, they're definitely an unreliable narrator, because first you're seeing their reaction, and they think they're totally justified in their reaction, and then you pull back and go, maybe not.
Not.
Yeah, I can see where as a writer, though, that would be a lot of fun to be doing that with your character.
Because I knew all along, that Madison hadn't done what Eliza thinks she has done. So I knew where it was all going, but she didn't. So.
Yes. Well, that's great. And, this is a great reminder to writers out there that you have to let your characters get into trouble and make mistakes. And then they can get out of them, if you give them the skills. But I see this a lot with beginning writers who are writing middle grade and YA. They are, as adults, they so want to have their characters make good choices because they want to teach readers to make good choices. It's like, that's just not the way it works.
Go very far. If everybody's a great role model.
Yes. And you need tension. Where's the tension if everybody makes good choices? They can figure out that they made a bad choice, and then that's how they learn. But yeah. So letting Eliza be an unreliable narrator, I think is more interesting for the reader as well. For sure. So Eliza Bing is not a big fat quitter won the Christopher Award, which is given each year to creators of books, films, and television specials that affirm the highest value of the human spirit, which is really awesome. And it's a very special award, I think, to win, and you get that lovely gold seal on your book. And I have a good friend who won a Christopher Award years ago for her picture book, and she went to a ceremony in New York, and they gave her, and her editor got to come. Her editor got an award too, which is great. I love that they acknowledge the editor there as well as the writer. So what was that like for you to win that?
That was really special and very cool. It was my first book, and to be honest, I wasn't familiar with the Christopher Award. So when when my editor and my agent told me, I was kind of like, oh, that's cool. And then I started learning more about it, and I was like, oh yeah, that's really cool. Didn't know that. I did go to New York and took my daughter with me because, you know, real life Eliza. And it was a blast. You know, I got to go and meet a lot of great writers and television producers and things, you know, whose work was great and whose works I had admired. And yeah, there's nothing like seeing a little gold seal on your book. And so that was really validating for me, especially, you know, just because you're never really sure and how a book's going to be received and things like that. And of course, you know, winning an award or being on state lists and things are always nice and very validating, but that it's okay if your book's not either.
Sure.
Absolutely. I mean, there's still, you know, it's still great to do that. You know, if you've got a book out, you're way ahead of the game, you know.
Absolutely.
You know, to begin with. So they're nice little pats on the back, definitely. And and it was, yeah, they were wonderful. I got to go, you know, to a banquet, like you said, in a building, in the top of the building in New York, and with a great view and great food.
Yeah.
Little gold seal on my book, and
yeah, no, that's
always fun. And very humbling too. Although I was kind of bummed because that year Henry Winkler had won an award too, and he didn't show. And I was like, man, I really wanted to meet the Fonz.
Oh, really?
But that's okay. That's okay. I was like, oh, I was really hoping he'd be there, but no such luck.
Yeah. Well, I noticed a lot of the awards you've won are the awards kids vote on for the state awards, the state Children's Choice Awards, which I think
Yes.
As an author must be the most gratifying.
Absolutely.
Because the kids are voting for your book. And yeah. I bet that's just great. Do you get a lot of, do you get fan mail from your readers? Do you hear from your readers?
Occasionally, you know, after I do, back before COVID, and I would do, you know, book events, I would get letters and fan mails, you know, after an event, which is really special. One of the things that I did that meant a lot to me, ended up meaning a lot to me, was there was a family who had contacted me in the spring, and they were saying, you know, their daughter was a big reader. She had loved Eliza Bing, and it was her 10th birthday, and they had promised this big giant birthday for the double digits, and of course COVID put a nix on that. So the mom had contacted me and asked, would I come and do a Zoom visit with her and her friends? And she, you know, bought everybody a copy of the book, and it was really cool, you know, just to connect with a reader just on a very kind of intimate way. And I get a very lovely letter about, you know, how much that meant to, you know, to the child, and it meant like a huge amount to me too, just because I get an opportunity to really speak with her, you know, kind of one-on-one, or I think there was like 10 kids there. And that was nice, you know, and they asked me questions, and, you know, they had all read the book and things like that. And so that was a kind of a lovely surprise about COVID. Was
what a great birthday
like
that. That was a very creative mom to come up with that.
Yes, I thought so too. I was like, oh yeah, I'm down for that, because that's a really good thinking. You know, I would have loved that as a 10-year-old.
Absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely. Wow. That's awesome. That's awesome. So you said it takes you a year to write a novel and another year to revise, which might be a shock to some people listening right now. So please talk about that a little bit. And what are you doing during those 2 years? Are you just working on this one book, or are there other things going on?
I have learned, like I learned to embrace my middle grade voice, I have learned to embrace the fact that I'm just a slow drafter, and that's okay. The story takes as long as it takes. That's just the way it is. I have friends, you know, a critique group partner, who, you know, who writes like, you know, a book in 3 months, and I'm just like, you know, it just, I'm so jealous of that speed. It's not what I can do. I tend to just take a while, and I've learned to realize that's okay. And
Mhm.
yeah, and I am working on other things. So I'm not spending, a lot of time on that one book. Or so sometimes, I may be working on it. I may take a break and maybe simmering that idea in my head, or working on something else, working on a picture book or working on a nonfiction book, whatever it is. And I tell the kids too, when I go into schools, the book that I have, a picture book, my first picture book was called To the Stars, the first American woman to walk in space. And it's co-authored with Kathy Sullivan, the astronaut who did that. And from the time she and I first started talking about, hey, do we want to do, do you want to do a book together, to it selling, not even being published, but to it selling, was 10 years.
Wow.
And the kids are always like, what? And I go, it's like less than 1,000 words, and it took me 10 years. It took us 10 years. And it just, sometimes it takes, you have to get all the right words and put them in the right order. And especially for a picture book, it just takes as long as it takes. And
Sure.
that's okay. And like I said, I did other things. I'm always, working on something at some level, but I've discovered that that's my process. And
Mhm.
and it's going to be different than somebody else.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's mine. So,
Yeah.
but it's good to know your process too, because I think then okay, when you have a downtime, or it's going to come back. Like you've been through it before, so
Yeah.
sort of the process. Like my agent had pointed out to me one time. She goes, "I know that you're about to have a major breakthrough when you are screaming mad and want to throw the thing away." She goes, "I know that when you're at that point, you are about to figure it out."
Yes.
And I'm like, she's right. And so now I've realized it's okay for me, to get there.
Yeah.
Because I know on the other side I will figure it out.
Right.
Yeah.
And how lucky you have an agent who knows your process. And
Yeah, well, yes, and that was a great insight for me when she told me that. I was like, I didn't know that about myself. Thank you. So, but now I'm okay now when I'm frustrated, because I know it means something good's coming down the road for me.
Great. Well, I want to talk real quick about your nonfiction before we get to some questions, but I do need to ask you your upcoming middle grade, which is really, we say upcoming, it's coming out in 2022, but in children's publishing, that's upcoming. Uh, Nothing is Little. Can you tell us a little bit about your protagonist, Felix? Because I just read a little blurb about this, and it sounds like a fascinating story.
Yeah, Felix is, first of all, he's my first male character, so that was kind of fun to do. Felix is 12 and he's got a lot of stuff going on. He's just started middle school. He's started taking growth hormone shots. He's getting a sibling, and his mom and stepdad have just announced that they're going to change their last name, and they've asked Felix if he would like to do that as well. And he's kind of feeling like, I don't know where I fit in. I don't know where I fit in at school, because I'm used to being the small kid, and I like being a small kid, and now I'm not going to be the small kid. So what does that mean for me? And I'm not sure, he's kind of having, he's excited about his sibling, but he's used to being an only child. So he kind of sets out, these things, all of these changes kind of bring up feelings about wanting to connect with his biological dad, who he's never met. So he joins the forensic science club at school, and that helps him kind of get some investigative skills, and he starts looking for his biological dad, because he thinks, if I can talk to my dad, I don't want to make the decision about my last name until I talk to my dad. I don't, I want to give him a chance to know who I am before I become literally somebody new. So that's
Wow.
that's the long version.
Yeah. So this is a perfect example. It sounds like a great book. I can't wait to read it. It really does. So you've got this, middle grade character, and a lot of times when I was critiquing manuscripts, the people wouldn't give their middle grade plots enough meat, and they had the very sort of typical middle grade issues of, the themes that we see a lot, which are such important: fitting in, who am I, where do I fit in my peer group, etc., what makes me special. But then you added this really interesting layer to that about him wanting to find his bio dad, and it was triggered by this name change that his parents want to do, which gives it that meat that just kind of takes it to another level. And I think that's so important. And I just want to say to anybody listening that if you are sort of working on a middle grade plot and you feel like your book isn't quite unique enough, maybe you don't have that meaty component to your plot that you need to really make it a little bit different. So I like that. Do you come up with your characters first and then figure out the plot from the characters? Say what kind of story would these characters be in?
I definitely come up with characters first,
Mhm.
and then I figure out where I want to put them. And what's kind of going back to that character-driven conversation. What's really interesting, I think, about Felix was that was another one that I spent years on and off writing. It was polished it up, worked with it, my agent, got it to where we submitted it, and my editor came back and said, "We love Felix and his family. We hate the plot." And I went, okay. But they said, "Are you willing to revise it?" And so, yeah, I pulled Felix and his family out of the old story and put them in a completely new situation. But it was all driven by that relationship, that they liked the idea that there was, that he likes his stepdad. His stepdad's a great guy. But that missing sort of, I want to find my dad, I want to connect with my dad, and then adding that forensic science kind of thing to it, because it goes back to like the trace evidence, the idea that, or Locard's exchange theory, that wherever we go, we leave pieces of ourselves. And so it connects with that forensic science, and he discovers too that even though he's not met his dad, he's left an impression on his dad, and his dad in turn has left an impression on him. So that's kind of like that theme, the theme of it. But yeah, like I said, what I thought was interesting was that, yeah, they did not like the plot at all. So, and I was like, but I spent all these years working on it. But when I stepped back and realized, okay, they were right, and I could still come up with a different story and a different plot. And I loved the character like that, and that's what they, resonated with my editor as well. So I think that works. I definitely come up with the character and then figure out where I'm going to put him.
Right.
And how they're going to react in this situation. And in this case with Felix, I have two different, I know how he's going to react in this situation, but we're not going to talk about that one because that, is going into the drawer. But we know how he's going to react in this situation. So.
But probably that first manuscript taught you so much about Felix that
absolutely
you had way more insight.
Oh yeah, and it went much faster too. Talking about like how the drafting, that one I was able to draft in less than 6 months. Actually, about 4.5 months, which is the fastest I'd ever had drafted a book. But it was because I had spent years and years getting to know who he was and learning about what he wanted to say and what he saw about the world. And it just, once I figured that out, it was easy. But it was that, it took me 4 years to do that 4 months. But again, it kind of goes back to that, it's like that iceberg, there's a lot going on below, but you don't always see that.
Right.
And it's okay. I don't consider that, wasted time or anything. Like you said, I learned who he was, and I learned the heart of the story, which apparently I had been missing. And then it was like, oh, that clicks. I get it now,
Yep, exactly. Well, that sounds great.
Thank you.
Yeah. So real quick, before we move on to questions, you started out writing nonfiction for an educational publisher, correct? And you were a teacher. Did being a teacher help you, do you think, get that gig or inform your writing. I know we have a lot of teachers in our audience, and do you think you know, a lot of writers don't, they sort of overlook doing work for hire for educational publishers, but that could be a great training ground as a writer.
Absolutely. Yeah. That was a great, I'm so grateful that I was able to do that for as long as I did. It gave me the opportunity to learn how to work with, okay, here's the format that we want. Here's the word count that we need. Here's, you know, the resources that we kind of need, or whatever it is. And so you're working within these boundaries, and that's good. You're getting a lot of practice with those things.
Right.
And, you know, there's not quite so many boundaries in fiction, but having that practice of writing it and writing for that age, again, because most of my nonfiction books are for that middle grade age. So I get a lot of practice middle grade. And I definitely think that having, being a teacher helped me get that gig.
Yeah.
Definitely. And because it gave me, in terms of marketability, it was helpful because, hey, you know, she's a former teacher, knows what she's doing, supposedly, in the classroom. And for me, it was an opportunity to just go and learn, you know, and teachers, that's a lot of times, you know, that's why you go into teaching, because you personally love to learn. And so writing the nonfiction books was a great gig for as long as I did it, because I would go and get to learn about these really cool things that I didn't know about, and then get to tell kids about it. So when I did the nonfiction, a lot of times what kind of informed me of that was, you know, if I found it interesting, I figured the kids would find it interesting. And if I found it boring, the kids are probably going to find it boring too. So I figured if I was having fun writing that, they were going to have fun reading that. And that's the kind of way I looked at it. So a lot of my nonfiction books, of course, you know, they have the dates and things like that, but that's not what I find interesting about history and science. You know, I wanted to learn about the people and experiments and things like that. So, but definitely being a teacher helped, and it was a great experience to get those books under my belt and learn how to work with a deadline and how to work with an editor and all of those great things. You know, definitely helped when I transitioned into fiction.
Sure. Okay, great. Well, let's get to some questions here. Deborah asks, can you write a character-driven book that is also plot-driven? Well, that's kind of what you've done, I think. You know, if we listen to the description of your plots on your books, but they're, like you said, you had to create the character first, and then the character sort of dictated what was going to happen in the plot. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, and that's a good question, and I an example that I might give is like the Harry Potter series. You know, I mean, those are both character driven and plot driven. You know, it has a great character and great characters, and then, you know, this very meaty plot, like you said. So absolutely, you can do one and the other. It doesn't have to be, you know, exclusive. So yeah.
Yeah, no, they totally can go together. Yeah. So I think just reading a lot of books is really going to give you a sense of how to do that. You know, sort of really analyzing how other authors created these really interesting characters who have this internal journey they're going on. There's a growth that they go through internally in the story, but then what is the plot that they're also involved in, and really just start analyzing that in books that you're reading. I think that's a great lesson. Okay, Harvey says, I want to write middle grade novels because of the age of the characters that I want to write about, but my voice sounds too adult for middle grade characters. How can I get my voice to sound less adult and more middle grade? I know that you said you kind of just sort of go by gut, but do you have any advice for voice?
Two things. One being just, you know, if you can eavesdrop on middle grade kids, and listen to how they talk and listen to the things that they're talking about. And that may just mean also reading middle grade and just getting an idea of, okay, even if you're not thinking about it or analyzing it, if you're reading something, your brain is sort of processing it, and it's going to, you know, come to you easier. And I think that, on the other hand, I think that there is a way to pull that off too. I mean, there's some really sophisticated middle grade books out there. For instance, my friend Elizabeth C. Bunce has a new series out, the Myrtle Hardcastle Mysteries, and they have big words in its top. I mean, it's set in Victorian times. It's kind of like a Victorian Sherlock Holmes thing, and it's just it's challenging, and I think that's okay. And I think that some readers are going to do that.
Yeah. What was the name of that series again?
The Myrtle Hardcastle Mysteries.
Myrtle Hardcastle Mysteries.
Yeah, the one I just finished. There's 2 of them out, and she's got 2 more. But How to Get Away with Myrtle and Premeditated Myrtle. But you know, they're challenging books, even for me as an adult. But I think the kids that's written for, that's okay, because not everybody's going to have that same sort of language or sensibility and stuff. Right. So I mean, if you have that adult voice, hey, maybe that works for you.
I think it's most important to have a voice that's authentic to the characters in dialogue. You know, I think that you definitely don't want your 12-year-old to sound like an adult when they're talking. They might be a really smart 12-year-old. They might have a great vocabulary, but you still need to get that sense that they're a kid or a young adult, even not an adult when they're talking.
Yeah, and a lot of that is, like I said, is just listening to real life middle schoolers and how do they talk and the words that they use, and you know, the length of their sentences, and are they talking in fractured, you know, kind of back and forth, you know, and it's just
exactly,
you got to listen to it, you have to read it, and it'll get easier.
Yeah, it's sort of their speech patterns, and when they're speaking to a friend, it's very different than if they're speaking to an adult.
Absolutely.
Or a person of authority. You know, they use different sentence structure and words, and so it is just paying attention. And even if you're writing historical fiction, you can bring that out in your characters' dialogue, even if they're not using modern slang or words. You can get that relationship. So Glynis asked, somewhere I left, there it is. Since you were a teacher, is it cool to call up my local public school and ask if I could just sit in on a 4th grade class? Once COVID's over, obviously.
I don't know. I guess it would depend on the school. You could, but like you were just saying, I mean, kids are going to be talking to each other in a different way. If you wanted to get, you know, kind of stalkerish, or you know, you could certainly look into, you know, becoming a lunch lady, or a lunch monitor, or a recess monitor, you know, where kids are real and they're talking, you know, amongst themselves versus, you know, speaking in class, which again is going to be a little bit more formal.
Yes.
I don't know if you could just walk into a school and say, I'm, you know, volunteer to be a recess monitor. But if you have kids in school, you might be able to get away with that.
Kids or grandkids or whatever. It depends on the school district very much. You know, I mean, even though my son was in school and I volunteered, they still did a background check on him and all that.
Background check and
But I volunteered in his classrooms from preschool through 4th grade. And then finally he's like, Mom, stop coming to school. So I stopped. But it was amazing, because also if you're a volunteer in there and the kids are used to seeing you, they kind of forget you're there.
Yep.
And then you just overhear the most amazing things.
Absolutely. I would, you know, be the mom who did carpool too, because I would love to just listen to my kids talk to their friends and just taking it all in. You know, don't mind mom, she's just taking notes.
I know, and they think you can't hear them. Right. When they're in the backseat talking, and you're like, I can hear you, but no.
I can hear you.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think libraries too might, now not for middle grade so much, but definitely if you're writing picture books, there's story time. Maybe you can volunteer there. So there are ways, but check with your local school and see what their policies are.
You're going to get in trouble.
No, you don't want to get arrested. Okay. Sapphire says, I'm struggling with my chapters being of widely different lengths, 375 words versus, say, 800 words. Is that a problem? Do you have any thoughts on that?
For me personally, not. It's not a problem, because again, you may have just a short amount of time, so a quick chapter is fine, and or maybe you want to dive into a longer scene, and that's okay. And again, I try to caution people not to try to do it organically. Whatever it is you're doing, do it organically. If the scene is going to just be a page, that's okay. And if it needs a little bit longer, that's okay too.
Sure.
And you kind of find a rhythm of, how many times, when you're breaking down a chapter, you can be like, how many different settings, are you going to be in? And mine tend to be shorter because I tend to just keep that action in one place and try not to, move them around too much. So naturally for me, it's going to be shorter, but yeah, it's just, if a scene takes a long time, it takes a long time. And it's not a bad thing. It just,
right.
But be aware of why you're doing it. And if there is, why is this short and why is this longer?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for knowing what a chapter needs to accomplish so you know when the chapter's done? Is it a plot point? Is it, something like that specific?
When I sit down to do a chapter, when I'm outlining things and getting ready to start a new chapter, I will definitely have, this is what I want to accomplish in this chapter. I'm very focused on, I need to either move the plot point. I need you to learn something new about the character. I need, these people to interact, whatever it is. But I know each of my chapters has a purpose, and I need to know before I sit down what that purpose is, because it helps sort of inform the writing. And if I know and I'm very clear, this is what I'm trying to accomplish, then the writing is easier. But yeah, for me, definitely I know each scene,
right,
has a goal.
right. Okay, great. And so you do create an outline then before you write?
Pantser versus an outliner. I kind of do a little bit of both. I mean, I do kind of some pre-writing where I've got an idea and I know where things are going to go. I always know the ending, or at least the general direction that I'm going, I should say, before I start. And I sort of, have a feel of at least what I think is the heart of the story. So very often that changes, and that's okay, as I get to know it. But I tend to just dive in, and then about 50 or 60 pages in, then I start going, oh, I should probably plan this out, and I'll pull out my outline, and do it that way. With this last book, like I said, I actually sold it on Synopsis. So I had 6 or 7 pages very detailed of what was going to happen, and I had some sample chapters, and that's what sold. So I knew where I needed to be.
Right.
And even that changed as the story evolved.
Yes.
And that's okay too.
Sure.
Realizing I don't have to follow that exact thing, but for me, it gave me a roadmap, and that made me feel better because I had kind of a safety net, like at least well, that may not be the best thing, but at least I have some direction.
Yeah. Well, and you were able to sell it on Synopsis because this was your 3rd book with Holiday House, yes. Right? So just to let people know, if it's your first novel, you got to write the whole thing.
Yeah, you have to write the whole thing. I think with this one, it was my 3rd book with this particular editor, and you have to remember I had written an entire version of Felix before.
That's right.
They knew enough about Felix, and it was a matter of just putting him in a different spot. And so, and I still had to do sample chapters, and they still had to make sure they felt comfortable that that I would be able to do it. But yeah, that's typically not how things go. And you
Right.
usually have to finish it with
Yeah.
fiction. I feel really blessed and fortunate that, you know, I have that kind of relationship with my editor, and that we're
Mhm.
able to do that at this point. But
Great.
yeah.
Great. Well, I don't want to keep you too much longer. We're already over time. We have a lot of amazing questions, but that we're not going to get to. Sorry. We'll have to have you back. But one last one here. Someone asked, Susan asked, are there any books on writing that you have used that you particularly like, especially in helping develop your characters?
You know, I've never that's a tough one because I've not really done a lot of craft books. I did when I first started out 20 some years ago. I did a lot of craft books, and I, off the top of my head, unfortunately, don't really remember a lot of them. Um, you know, I mean, you've got your classics like Bird by Bird, and that's less about craft and more, you know, about writing and process and things like that. Um, yeah, I'd have to go back and look that up. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
it's
I'm
hard when
sorry.
people, I know, I hate it when people ask me, what, give us some
I'm like,
books.
I just,
Yeah,
I find it more helpful to write and learn by writing, and learn by, you know, going to conferences and listening to how somebody else is doing
mhm,
that versus just reading
sure.
in a
Yeah,
book. But you know, I do recognize everybody's a little bit different in how,
right.
you know,
Sure.
they like to
Do you
get
have
their.
a system for getting to know your characters? Do you interview them? I mean, or do you just kind of start thinking about them and then see what comes up?
That that's the second one. You know, I know some people, you know, well, I know people, you know, who interview them and know what they all look like, and which is kind of a funny thing. My critique partner had just finished a story of mine. She's like, I don't know what your character looks like, and I'm like, yep, I don't ever describe my characters, like, and I do that on purpose.
Mhm.
Because I want readers to be able to know or picture them themselves. So I rarely will even know what, you know, color hair my character has, unless it's important to the story. Then of course I would mention it.
Sure.
But I the way that I get to know my characters is just to start writing, and
Mhm.
they'll start to talk to me, and you know, and sometimes they surprise me. I tell the kids that with the Eliza Bing book, her best friend in the story in the beginning there is Tony, and I struggled with that character for so long, and it was because Tony was a girl in the original version, and I
Mm.
had this sort of, you know, epiphany one day where I'm just like, I'm so frustrated with the scene. And Tony just kind of popped up in my head and said, that's because I'm a boy. And I went, oh, okay, that makes so much more sense now. And I was able to write the character as a boy, but it was a matter of just listening to that character say that. And I know that's kind of hard. It's a strange thing to say, especially if, you know, if you're not used to that happening. You know, my
Mhm.
husband thinks I'm crazy, but I'm like, but my characters, they'll just tell me things.
Yep.
And like Tony saying, I'm a boy, and that's why this is why it isn't working. And it, once I realized that, then that whole relationship and that whole story
Mhm.
changed and kind of fell into place. But for me, it's just a lot of listening and a lot of like, what about this? And then sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. But
Mhm.
I know a little bit about my character before I get started.
Mhm.
I know not everything, but enough that I can hopefully give them a voice and get them going.
Right. Well, and I think you have to be willing, if you write that way, to know that you're going to be tossing out a lot of stuff that you write. You
Yep.
know, it's not going to work. And you're giving yourself time, like you said, the book it takes as long as it takes. So there's no pressure. Some writers aren't comfortable with that. They want to know exactly where they're going when they sit down to write their draft. So they do a lot of pre-planning.
Right.
Other writers like to sort of wander into the story, and you just find what works for you. But I
Absolutely.
think uh, knowing that you may throw out anything you write at any moment, you know, if it's not working, or not throw out, but move to another file maybe.
Or delete.
um,
Yeah, there's very satisfying to just delete. You know,
yeah,
there it's
yeah,
gone.
yeah. And so it's kind of giving yourself permission to experiment and
Yeah,
not put so much
absolutely.
pressure on yourself that, okay, I'm starting chapter one. This has to be the one that works. It frees you up, I think.
I think so too. I mean, I think a lot, and that's the way I kind of visualize it too. It's like I'm walking into this forest and I'm going down this one path, and sometimes I can get pretty far into the forest with that path, and then sometimes it's like, no, that's not
Yeah.
where it's going, and I have to back out and try to get in a different way, and that's okay. Just like you said, just be open to figuring that out and
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
slow if you have to. Like I
Yeah.
said, I've embraced that I am a slow
Yeah.
drafter, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Well, I find that even with articles I write, sometimes I know what I want to say and I'm getting in there and it's just like, I'm like pound,
Right.
it's so hard. And then if I just go, I'm going to delete this whole thing and start over,
Yeah.
it just comes. Um,
Because you've
and
done that work before.
yeah,
You've
yeah.
done the work. It just may not be the right work, but
Mhm.
it's still valuable.
It's valuable. Now I know what I don't want to say.
Right,
So-
exactly. Exactly. I know what's not working.
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, Carmella, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time tonight and for answering our questions. And I know people got a lot out of this. So, we're when Nothing is Little comes out, which I'm just so intrigued by Felix and his story. I can't wait to read it. Maybe you'll come back on and talk
Yeah,
to us about that.
absolutely.
I would
Absolutely.
love it. Okay.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you all for being here, and we'll see you next week. Good night,
Bye.
everybody.